You see, there is a quiet storm hidden within the empath, a force so still and unseen that most people overlook it, until one day it erupts like thunder, cracking through years of silent skies. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone who has spent a lifetime absorbing the emotions of others finally reaches their limit? When I speak of the empath, I do not speak of mere sensitivity, nor of someone who simply feels what others feel. I am speaking of something deeper, an archetype, a living, breathing emblem of the psyche's most profound capacity for connection, suffering, and transcendence. The empath is not merely a personality type or a gentle heart. It is a design of the soul itself, a sacred geometry holding both radiance and ruin, tenderness and destruction. And when this archetype grows weary, when it has been pulled and stretched beyond its natural boundaries, something far more potent and far more unsettling begins to awaken. This danger is not born from violence or vengeance. No, it is subtler, more spiritual, the kind that emerges when something once passive and yielding suddenly refuses to be defined by collective expectation. The empath, in the beginning, lives as a mirror. They reflect the hidden emotional realities of others, absorbing the invisible storms of those around them without ever realizing the weight they carry. It is in their very nature an unconscious surrender to the emotional tides of the collective. And though this is a gift, it is one edged with pain. For to feel everything is also to bleed for what was never yours to bear, to live inside wounds that were never meant for your heart. Over time, the empath becomes like a vessel filled beyond its brim, trembling, glistening, one breath away from spilling over. And when that vessel finally cracks, what pours forth is not rage alone, but revelation, the sharp, blinding clarity of self-awareness. It is the instant the archetype recognizes itself in the mirror and refuses to serve as the container for everyone else's shadows. There is something mythic in that moment when the empath says, "Enough." It echoes the awakening of a long, slumbering goddess rising from centuries of dust and chains, shaking the earth with her return. For the awakened empath is no longer the echo of another's need. They become the embodiment of individuation itself, the sacred act of separating what is truly theirs from what belongs to the world. And this is why I say that a fed-up empath is among the most dangerous archetypes of all, for their awakening threatens the entire web of unconscious projections that once kept them bound. The people who have depended on them for emotional labor, for endless tolerance and quiet understanding, suddenly come face to face with a force they never imagined. They see before them someone transformed, no longer defined by suffering, but by an unshakable refusal to carry what does not belong to them. It is both shocking and magnetic, a quiet rebellion of the soul. And to truly understand this transformation, we must look deeper, into the realm where light meets shadow. Every empath carries a shadow, often lying dormant for years, maybe decades, waiting beneath layers of kindness and restraint. Yet the shadow of the empath is not what many might assume. It is not cruelty, nor aggression, nor vengeance. Instead, it is the repressed self, the silenced voice, the authentic truth that once surrendered itself in order to comfort and absorb the pain of others. Can you imagine what happens when that voice finally demands to be heard? This shadow grows dangerous, not because it seeks to destroy, but because it has been denied expression for far too long. It expands quietly, like a hidden reservoir of unshed tears and unspoken truths. And when that dam finally breaks, it floods the landscape of the psyche with something raw and startling, pure, unfiltered authenticity. This moment is not the empath becoming selfish or cruel. It is the archetype returning to its original wholeness. The psyche insisting on balance after years of fragmentation. I have often observed, even in dreams, how this transition reveals itself through powerful inner symbols. A woman who has lived a lifetime in gentleness may suddenly dream herself as a lioness, fierce and radiant, or as a warrior wreathed in flame. A man who has long been the peacemaker may dream of earthquakes, storms, or fire sweeping through the ruins of an old world. These are not portents of outward destruction. They are the soul's own language, the psyche's way of reclaiming what it had buried. The unconscious, after all, will not tolerate imbalance forever. It will speak, even if it must erupt like a volcano, scattering illusions in its wake. So when the empath finally awakens, they are not simply standing up for themselves, they are embodying a force of nature, one that has been denied its rightful voice. Yet there is something more subtle, almost sacred about this shift. When I say that the Fed-Up Empath is dangerous, I do not mean they intend harm. I mean, they will no longer perform the roles assigned by the collective unconscious. They begin dismantling the illusions that once kept them bound to the pain of others, illusions that maintained entire systems of dependence. This act of inner liberation is dangerous only to those who have survived on their silence. It threatens the narcissist, who once fed on their light, and it unsettles the social structures that glorify martyrdom but punish individuality. The empath who finally says no is, in truth, uttering a profound yes, yes to their soul, to their truth, to the sacred path of individuation. Have you ever felt that moment? That quiet, thunderous realization that you will no longer bear the emotional weight of a world refusing to heal itself. That moment marks the birth of the archetypal warrior within the empath. It is as if the soft moonlight of their nature merges with the fierce power of the sun, the gentle and the wild, the receptive and the radiant, finally becoming one. They become whole. They integrate what was once projected onto others. They stop living as the unconscious healer for everyone else and begin, at last, to live as a conscious being aware of their own boundaries, their own energy, their own quiet power. What makes this transition so profound is that it is not merely a psychological shift. It is spiritual, elemental, almost mythic in its depth. The empath, when fed up, is not only confronting the people who have taken from them, they are facing the very archetypes that shaped their identity from the beginning. In the silence of awakening, they begin to ask the questions that unravel entire lifetimes. Why do I feel responsible for everyone's suffering? Why do I equate love with sacrifice? These questions do not hover on the surface of the mind, they plunge deep, reaching the roots of the psyche, descending into the collective unconscious, where ancient myth and ancestral patterns still breathe. Perhaps the empath was taught by the world that to be good is to be endlessly selfless, to give until one disappears. Perhaps within them lives the echo of an ancestral wound, the pain of those who were silenced, punished, or cast out for daring to speak their truth. When these patterns are finally recognized, the empath begins to see with piercing clarity that their pain was never merely personal. It was archetypal, inherited, carried through generations like an invisible thread of sorrow. I often envision the Fed-Up Empath as a solitary figure standing before the edge of a dark, whispering forest. Behind them lies the familiar world, the safe but suffocating realm where they have played the role of healer, listener, caretaker. Before them stretches the unknown, a shadowy landscape filled with their own long-buried desires, needs, and the call of the authentic self. To cross that threshold requires courage, a rare kind of courage, the kind born not from battle, but from surrendering to truth. It is the hero's journey, but with a twist. For the empath's dragon is not an external beast waiting to be slain. It is the inner terror of being seen as selfish, unkind, or unworthy. To confront and slay this dragon is to claim the sacred right to exist as a whole person, not merely as a reflection of others' wounds. In our collective myths, those who feel deeply are often painted as fragile or weak, as though compassion were a flaw. Yet nothing could be further from the truth. True empathy is one of the rarest forms of strength, a force that many will never truly comprehend. But when that strength is exploited, when the world takes without gratitude, when compassion is mistaken for compliance, the empath must either transform or be consumed. I've seen too many souls collapse under the unbearable weight of unspoken sorrows that were never theirs to carry. Their hearts, once radiant, sink beneath the tide of everyone else's pain. And yet, when the empath awakens, something extraordinary happens. They emerge from the ashes carrying a wisdom unlike any other, the kind forged in silence and suffering, the kind that knows exactly what it means to survive the collective shadow. You might ask, why is this archetype so dangerous now? Because we live in an age starving for authenticity, yet terrified of its rawness. A fed-up empath refuses to play by the unspoken rules of polite society. They will not smile and nod when something is false. They have no patience left for manipulation, deceit, or coercion. They see through the masks others wear, and once you have seen, you cannot unsee. The world trembles before such clarity, for it does not know what to do with someone who refuses to participate in its illusions. This is why the empath, once awakened, is so often feared, misunderstood, or even attacked. But this fear does not arise because the empath is harmful. It exists because the empath is free. And freedom, especially the kind born from pain, unsettles those who remain bound. This kind of liberation is never easy. It is earned through suffering. For to be an empath is to walk through fire again and again, to feel the sting of betrayal that was never meant for you, to cry tears that do not belong to your story. Yet within that fire, something sacred is forged. The soul becomes tempered, like steel drawn from flame, unbreakable, unyielding, radiant with quiet strength. The empath who reaches their breaking point also reaches the threshold of creation. They are no longer satisfied with being the silent absorber of pain. They become the creator of new boundaries, new truths, new ways of being. This act of creation born from exhaustion, clarity, and courage is what makes them powerful beyond measure. Imagine, for a moment, the empath as a figure who has spent a lifetime kneeling, bearing the invisible burdens of others. When they finally rise, they do not rise as they once were. They stand tall, transformed, carrying within them the wisdom of every wound, every tear, every quiet night spent healing what was never theirs to heal. They become a mirror that no longer reflects the projections of others, but shines instead with its own unmistakable light. And that light, that self-awareness, is dangerous to those who once thrived in their silence. For now, the empath speaks with the voice of the self, the archetypal core of the psyche that seeks wholeness above all else. When the empath reaches this turning point, they are no longer defined by the expectations of others, but by the deeper rhythm of their own inner truth. The transformation rarely arrives as a sudden explosion, though it can feel like one. It is, in truth, the culmination of countless subtle moments, years of quiet endurance, of swallowing pain, of seeing without speaking, until one day the psyche whispers, or sometimes roars no more. That no is not a rejection of love, but an affirmation of life itself. It is the soul reclaiming its sovereignty, declaring its right to exist as whole and separate. It is the realization that true compassion does not mean being consumed by the wounds of the world, but rather standing as a pillar of strength rooted in self, discerning what belongs to the collective and what belongs to the individual. The empath's journey, however, is often hidden beneath layers of cultural conditioning. We live in societies that glorify the image of the ever-giving, self-sacrificing healer, the one who is praised for endurance, but never for boundaries. This pattern runs deep, especially within families where emotional dynamics are unbalanced. From an early age, the empath learns to calm the anger of the father, to absorb the sadness of the mother, to hold together the broken pieces no one else will face. Through this, they unconsciously adopt a belief that their worth comes not from who they are, but from what they give. This belief becomes a kind of invisible cage, woven from love, duty, and fear. And to break free of this cage, the empath must face the most terrifying question of all. Who am I if I am not defined by what I give? In dreams, this inner transformation often takes the form of a confrontation, a meeting with powerful archetypal figures: the mother, the father, the king, or the trickster. The dream might show the empath standing inside a burning house, refusing to save everyone, or crossing a collapsing bridge that leaves no way back. These images are not random. They are messages from the unconscious, guiding the empath toward individuation, toward the sacred process of becoming whole. Individuation is the central task of the human soul, the sacred process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who the world expects or demands you to be. For the empath, this path is especially profound, for it means discovering that love is not synonymous with self-erasure. To love deeply does not require disappearing. When I speak of the empath as dangerous, I am speaking of their ability to disrupt the false order of things, to shake the foundations of illusion that have long defined their existence. A fed-up empath no longer tolerates manipulation or subtle control disguised as affection. They will not remain silent in the presence of injustice, nor will they continue to pour their energy into relationships that drain their life force. Their refusal is unsettling because it exposes the fragility of systems built on dependency and silence. And so, the awakened empath becomes a truth-teller, and truth-tellers, throughout history, have always been the ones who make others uneasy. They strip away the masks people wear. They uncover hidden dynamics, and in doing so, they compel others to confront their own shadows. Yet this awakening carries not only psychological depth, but spiritual weight. The empath is, by nature, a bridge between worlds, between the conscious and the unconscious, the personal and the collective. They sense what others cannot name, They intuit what remains unspoken. Sometimes it is as though they feel the tremors of the collective psyche moving through them like distant thunder. But once fed up, they no longer use this sacred gift to serve the egos of others. Instead, they dedicate it to something far greater, the unfolding of truth, the emergence of authenticity. In this light, their danger becomes their blessing. They embody the archetype of the wounded healer, but unlike before, they now understand a vital truth. All true healing must begin with the self. Consider the ancient myth of Chiron, the wounded centaur who could heal all others, but never himself. The empath's path mirrors this story in every way. For years, they give endlessly, heal tirelessly, and carry the pain of others at great personal cost. But when exhaustion finally takes hold, when the giving becomes too heavy to bear, they are forced to turn inward. There, in that moment of collapse, a revelation occurs. They begin to see that their wound is not merely personal. It is a reflection of the collective wound of humanity itself, the shared pain of disconnection, of forgotten wholeness. By tending to this wound, by learning to love themselves without condition, the empath transcends the role of healer. They become something far greater. They become whole. And wholeness, in a world that feeds on fragmentation, is indeed a dangerous thing. I have often said that the unconscious will do anything to be heard. For the empath, the unconscious often speaks through the body through exhaustion, illness, anxiety, or sudden emotional collapse. These are not signs of weakness, but urgent messages, cries for attention from the neglected parts of the psyche. When the empath finally listens, when they stop running from their own needs, a profound transformation begins to unfold. They start to live from the center of their being rather than from the outer edges. This shift is both subtle and radical. It changes not only how they see themselves, but how they walk through the world. Their perception sharpens, their awareness deepens. The empath begins to recognize the repeating cycles of giving and taking, of projection and expectation patterns that once bound them unconsciously, now stand revealed beneath the clear light of awareness. They begin to see how they have been cast into roles that were never truly theirs to play. Perhaps they were the family's peacekeeper, the loyal friend who always listened, or the partner who forgave endlessly, no matter the cost. These roles are masks carefully constructed, socially rewarded, yet painfully suffocating. They may have served their purpose once, offering safety or belonging, but they are not the truth of the soul. And when the empath finally becomes fed up, they are the one who tears away these masks and says, "This is not who I am. This is who you wanted me to be." Such an act, though quiet on the surface, is nothing short of revolutionary, for it reclaims the self from the grip of the collective unconscious. Yet this reclamation is not gentle. It is raw, searing, and often heartbreaking. It is painful to see how much of one's life has been shaped by invisible expectations and unspoken rules. It is agonizing to face the anger that has been buried beneath years of forced kindness and silence. And yet this pain is the price of freedom, the necessary fire through which the true self emerges. By walking through this fire, the empath learns a life-altering truth. They are not a vessel designed to carry the emotions of others. They are a sovereign soul with their own desires, their own voice, their own sacred power. This realization feels like both an ending and a beginning, like dying and being born at once. The old self, the one built on martyrdom, apology, and quiet suffering, fades away. In its place, a new self rises, radiant, steady, and unshakable. It is here, within this rebirth, that the empath's true danger lies. They no longer play by the rules of the unconscious collective. They are no longer afraid of being disliked, misunderstood, or rejected. They have stood face to face with their own shadow and embraced it fully. And once you have embraced your shadow, no one can use it against you. The old tools of manipulation, guilt, shame, fear lose their grip. They dissolve in the light of awareness. The empath becomes like an alchemist who has transmuted lead into gold, turning suffering into wisdom, pain into power. And that wisdom becomes a weapon not of violence, but of clarity. It is something no one can steal or corrupt. I often liken this transformation to the mythic phoenix. The empath burns in the flames of their own awakening. But from those ashes, they rise not quietly, not politely, but fiercely, gloriously alive. This rising is the roar of a soul reclaiming its voice after lifetimes of silence. It is unapologetic. It is electric. It is the sound of truth breaking through illusion. And that roar, that raw, uncontainable authenticity, is what the world fears most, because it cannot be silenced. It challenges the very structures of power that depend on silence and obedience. It dismantles the narratives that glorify suffering while condemning self-respect. It is the voice of authenticity, and authenticity, by its nature, is always revolutionary. If you have ever reached that point of being truly fed up, you know the energy I speak of. It is not mere anger. It is something purer, a form of clarity that slices through the fog of conditioning. It is the moment you realize that empathy is a gift, yes, but it is not a chain. You are not here to save everyone. You are not here to bleed for those who refuse to heal themselves. You are here to live fully, freely, and unapologetically as the person you were always meant to be. And when that truth settles into your bones, your empathy transforms. It becomes sharper, cleaner, stronger. It no longer drains you because it is no longer entangled with the unconscious demands of others. It becomes a force of discernment, a blade of insight, a weapon of truth. The fed-up empath is dangerous precisely because they are free, and freedom is the rarest thing in this world. Most people live bound by invisible chains, forged from fear, expectation, and collective conditioning. But when you break those chains, you become something the world can neither predict nor control. You become a mirror that reflects the falseness of the world back to itself, a surface so clear that illusion cannot survive its gaze. You become, in a sense, an archetype of transformation itself, a living embodiment of what it means to move from unconsciousness into awareness, from shadow into light. The fed-up empath carries within them an ancient energy, one that feels older than time, as if it has been waiting across lifetimes for the moment to awaken. This awakening is not born overnight, nor is it something the world encourages us to embrace. Most societies praise the empath only as long as they remain soft, pliable, endlessly forgiving, gentle enough to soothe others, quiet enough to never disturb the peace. But when that same empath begins to stand tall, their spine straight, their voice steady, their eyes unclouded by illusion, something trembles in the collective fabric. They are no longer the invisible servant of other people's wounds. They become something entirely different, the guardian of their own soul. And when someone who has always been defined by their willingness to carry others suddenly stops carrying, the world takes notice. Those who once relied on the empath's silence feel exposed, unsettled. Why? Because they are now forced to face the shadows they once projected onto the empath. This shift, though it may look personal on the surface, is profoundly archetypal. It stirs something ancient within the collective psyche, the call of the rebel healer. The empath, now fed up and awakened, begins to embody this archetype, one who refuses to merely soothe the surface of pain, but demands that truth and light enter the hidden depths where no one dares to look. This is why such empaths often feel so intense to others. They have walked through their own inner inferno, confronted their suppression, merged with their shadow, and returned, carrying something utterly unshakable. Their empathy is no longer naive or easily manipulated. It has become sharp, discerning, even surgical in its precision. They can sense deceit in the tone of a word, the tremor of a smile, the energy behind a gesture. They feel it when someone hides behind a mask, when words are spun to manipulate rather than connect. And when they see it, they call it out not with aggression, but with a clarity so unwavering it slices through falsehood like a blade of light. Yet this is not to say that the fed-up empath grows cold or cruel. Quite the opposite. They become more compassionate than ever before. But their compassion now flows from strength, not self-betrayal. They no longer bleed themselves dry to keep others comfortable. Their empathy no longer demands self-sacrifice. It demands truth. Their compassion becomes fierce, a sacred form of truth-telling that can feel uncomfortable, even unbearable, to those who prefer comforting lies. They are willing to speak the unspeakable, not out of cruelty, but because they have learned that real love cannot exist without honesty. They are willing to lose people rather than lose themselves. That is the quiet revolution of the awakened empath. And within this transformation, an alchemy takes place. They come to see that much of their old suffering did not come from feeling too much, but from never knowing where they ended and others began. This awareness changes everything. It draws a boundary that is not made of walls, but of wisdom. It is the birth of true empathy, the kind that heals without self-destruction, the kind that sees clearly and still chooses love. They confused empathy with responsibility, believing it was their duty to fix everyone around them, as if love meant carrying the world's pain upon their own shoulders. But the awakened empath sees now that this is an illusion, a distortion born from old wounds and inherited expectations. They understand, perhaps for the first time, that true healing can only occur when each soul takes ownership of its own wounds. The empath's role, then, is not to carry, but to witness, to guide, to illuminate, to hold sacred space without dissolving into another's suffering. This is the turning point, the quiet revolution that makes them powerful. It is the moment where empathy ceases to be a weight that drains them and becomes a light that radiates effortlessly. No longer do they dim themselves to soothe others. Instead, they shine in a way that invites others to rise. I have often seen this transformation reflected in the symbolic language of dreams. A person who once dreamed of drowning in endless, restless oceans begins to dream of walking upon solid earth beneath an open sky. A woman who once dreamed of bleeding endlessly finds herself dreaming of fire no longer consuming, but controlled, warm, and illuminating. These symbols speak of integration of the delicate moment when the unconscious no longer dominates, but instead aligns in harmony with the conscious mind. It is as though the psyche itself whispers, "You have given enough. Now it is time to claim your life." Such dreams are not mere fantasies. They are signposts from the deeper self, subtle messages guiding the empath toward wholeness, toward the reclamation of their own life force. And yet, the world often misunderstands this shift. It looks upon the fed-up empath and labels them cold, selfish, or changed, and indeed, they have changed. They are no longer the same person who once accepted mistreatment or tolerated being drained by others' endless needs. But this is not selfishness, it is self-respect. It is the profound understanding that one cannot pour endlessly from an empty vessel. Love without boundaries, the empath learns, is not love at all, it is self-erasure. And sometimes, the most loving act one can perform, both for oneself and for others, is the act of saying no. This realization is deeply liberating, yet it also brings with it a quiet loneliness. For when you step out of the role of the silent giver, not everyone will applaud your freedom. Some will attempt to draw you back into the old roles, to guilt you into carrying what no longer belongs to you. Some will call you unkind because you refuse to bleed for them anymore. But this is the true test of the archetype. Will you remain faithful to your newfound integrity even when the world resists your awakening? Will you stand in your truth when the chorus of old expectations grows loud? At this stage, the empath begins to embody a new kind of strength, one that does not roar, but resonates calm, grounded, and unshakable. It is the strength of one who has walked through their own shadow and emerged whole. They no longer fear the darkness, because they understand now that the darkness is not an enemy, but a part of them, a teacher, a mirror, a source of depth. They have gazed into the reflection of the unconscious and dared to embrace what they found there. The anger, the grief, the unmet, needs long denied. And in that courageous embrace, they have freed themselves from the ancient chains of repression. This inner freedom radiates outward, subtle yet undeniable. You can feel it when they enter a room. The atmosphere changes, the energy settles, clarity fills the air. They do not need to speak. Their very presence tells the story of boundaries reclaimed, of power remembered, of authenticity restored. But this power is not born of dominance or control. The empath does not seek to conquer the world. Their strength lies in authenticity itself, the kind of power that flows naturally when a soul finally stands in its own truth. And authenticity has a way of reshaping everything it touches, quietly, profoundly, sometimes even uncomfortably. It causes others to step into their own truth, whether they are ready or not. It challenges them to face what they have long avoided, to see the cracks in the masks they wear. This is why the empath, once awakened, can feel dangerous to those who are not prepared for truth. Their mere presence becomes a mirror, reflecting the falseness of others with startling clarity. And not everyone is willing to look into that mirror. Some turn away, unsettled by what they glimpse, not because the empath exposes them deliberately, but because authenticity itself cannot help but illuminate deception. The archetype of the fed-up empath, in this sense, is deeply intertwined with the collective unconscious of our age. We live in a time of profound disconnection, where people numb themselves with endless distractions, where true emotion is often buried, diluted, or sold as performance. The empath, by their very nature, feels this collective wound in their bones. When they awaken, when they finally refuse to play along in the grand masquerade of superficiality, they become agents of transformation. Their authenticity, their boundaries, their unapologetic truth send ripples through the collective psyche, unsettling the old patterns that feed on denial. It is as though their very being whispers a quiet rebellion. Enough pretending. They are not content to remain silent while the world hides behind masks. When they speak, their voice carries the weight of every truth they have swallowed, every emotion they were told to suppress. Have you ever felt that awakening within yourself? That subtle stirring, that rising heat beneath the surface? It is not hatred, it is something sacred. It is holy fire of anger, the kind that says, I deserve to exist as I am. This anger is not to be feared. It is not destructive. It is the soul demanding balance, burning away illusion, clearing a path for the authentic self to finally emerge. Too often, empaths are taught to fear their anger, to bury it under endless layers of forgiveness, patience, and self-sacrifice. But when anger is integrated, when it is met with awareness instead of shame, it becomes a source of power. It is not the voice of destruction, but of transformation. It says, this is not right. This must change. In myth and symbol, this awakening is often portrayed by the rise of the warrior archetype, not a warrior of violence, but of fierce self-protection. The empath who was once passive becomes the guardian of their own soul. They learn that love does not mean self-erasure, that compassion does not mean endless submission. They become a protector of their inner light, aware that to preserve it is not selfish, it is sacred duty. And here, at this pivotal threshold, their empathy reaches its highest form. For when you are no longer drained by others, when you are deeply rooted in your own strength, your capacity to love, to heal, and to serve expands beyond measure. You no longer help from guilt or compulsion. You help because you choose to, from a place of abundance, a heart that overflows rather than depletes. This is why the Fed-Up Empath is the most dangerous archetype of all. Not because they harm, but because they heal in ways that force others to confront their own shadows. They do not enable pain, they expose it. They do not soothe the ego's illusions, they dismantle them with compassion and truth. And they live this truth so completely, so fully, that it cannot be ignored. They are like a flame in the darkness, steady, radiant, unapologetic, not asking for permission to shine, but burning simply because that is what light does. And once this flame is ignited, no power in the world can extinguish it. The empath who has crossed this threshold no longer seeks to be liked, approved of, or understood by all. They know that the path of authenticity can be lonely, yet it is sacred and worth every step. They understand that the world may misinterpret their strength, may call their boundaries cruelty, their self-respect arrogance. But they no longer live for the approval of the world. They live for alignment, for that deep inner resonance with the self, that eternal center within, where the personal and the universal meet in quiet harmony. This alignment is what gives them a quiet, unshakable power, a strength that does not need to shout to be felt. They no longer search for validation outside themselves because they have discovered it within, in that deep inner stillness that cannot be taken away. And this, truly, is where the real work begins. For once the empath has awakened, they are called not only to awareness, but to integration to unite their power with their gift, to embody what they have learned. They must discover how to use their empathy with intention, not as a reflexive reaction, but as a conscious and sacred tool. They must learn when to open their heart and when to shield it, when to listen and when to step back in silence. They must learn to feel deeply without absorbing the pain of others, to understand without losing themselves in another storm. This is no easy task. It demands vigilance, wisdom, and practice. Yet this is the path to mastery. And in walking it, the empath becomes more than a healer of others. They become a living embodiment of balance and wholeness itself. The final stage of the empath's transformation does not arrive with a grand announcement or dramatic revelation. It emerges quietly, like dawn spreading across the horizon, steady, subtle, and unstoppable. Their presence begins to radiate from deep within, needing no explanation. They no longer defend their boundaries or justify their choices, for their very energy speaks for them. Their silence now carries weight. Their stillness has power. There is a grounded confidence that cannot be shaken, no matter who or what stands before them. They have walked through the underworld of their own psyche, faced their shadow, and returned, not as who they once were, but as who they truly are. This authenticity is magnetic. It draws others in, yet it also unsettles those who have not dared to meet their own depths. The awakened empath is no longer a vessel for other people's projections. They have become a mirror, reflecting those projections back with clarity, forcing others to confront what they have long avoided. And this, perhaps, is the true power and danger of the awakened empath. They are not merely compassionate. They are catalysts of transformation. Wherever they go, change follows, not because they seek it, but because falseness cannot survive in their presence. They are uninterested in playing roles or maintaining peace at the cost of their soul. To them, truth has become more sacred than approval, integrity more valuable than comfort. They will disrupt the familiar patterns of those around them, not out of malice, but from a deep, instinctual drive toward truth. And this drive is not personal, it is archetypal. It's the same eternal force that compels the hero to face the dragon, the mystic to walk alone into the desert, the wounded healer to finally tend to their own scars. The empath's awakening follows this same mythic rhythm: the journey inward, the descent, the confrontation, and the return. Yet this path, though luminous, is not without its challenges. The empath who awakens must learn to hold their newfound power with care. For years, they were defined by overgiving, by pouring themselves into others until nothing remained. Now, as they reclaim their voice and their boundaries, there arises a new temptation to swing to the opposite extreme, to close themselves off, to build walls so high that no one can reach their heart again. But real mastery lies not in the extremes, it lies in balance. To remain open-hearted, yet discerning, compassionate yet firm, is the true dance of the mature empath. It is the delicate equilibrium between love and wisdom, between feeling and knowing. This is the integration of opposites, the meeting of light and shadow within a single being. In many ways, this inner union reflects the essence of Jung's work, that the goal of life is not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness comes only when we embrace every part of ourselves, not just the polished and proud, but also the hidden, the wounded, the pieces we would rather keep in the dark. For the empath, this journey of acceptance means not only honoring their sacred gift for feeling, but also recognizing the power of their anger, their instinct for boundaries, and their right to protect their own energy. These aspects are not flaws to be corrected. They are essential fragments of the psyche's grand mosaic. When the empath denies these pieces, they remain divided, fragile, and easily swayed by the emotions of others. But when they begin to accept them truly, deeply, something extraordinary happens. They become whole. And wholeness, in its quiet simplicity, is the truest form of power. It is the kind of power that does not seek dominance, but radiates peace. There is also a profound spiritual dimension to this wholeness. The awakened empath often feels an expanding sense of connection, a thread that links them to something vast, timeless, and beyond the self. Call it the soul, the higher self, the divine essence, whatever the name. The feeling is unmistakable. They begin to see that their sensitivity was never a burden meant to weigh them down. It was always meant to be a bridge, a living pathway between hearts, a means of connecting the human experience to the deeper truth of existence. And now, freed from the chains of unconscious giving and emotional servitude, they can wield this gift with clarity and purpose. They become like a vessel no longer filled with the pain of the world, but with wisdom, compassion, and the ability to discern what truly needs their light and what does not. In this awakened state, the empath no longer feels the desperate compulsion to fix everyone or to absorb every wound they encounter. They understand, perhaps for the first time, that every soul has its own path, its own lessons to learn, and its own timing to unfold. Love, they realize, is not the same as rescuing. True love honors autonomy. And so the empath begins to offer their presence not as a savior, but as a mirror one that reflects truth, gently yet unmistakably, without judgment or attachment. Such authenticity is a radical act in a world that thrives on pretense, distraction, and emotional avoidance. It is no wonder, then, that the awakened empath is both revered and feared. They see too much. They sense what others deny. And perhaps most powerfully, they are no longer willing to stay silent about it. I have seen this transformation unfold many times, and it is always accompanied by the same unmistakable fire, a light behind the eyes, a quiet determination that burns from within. It is the fire of someone who has walked through their own death and returned renewed. The fire of someone who understands, at last, that their empathy is not a curse, but a sacred instrument of truth. Like all sacred tools, it must be wielded with both strength and discernment. This fire cannot be dimmed by rejection, nor extinguished by misunderstanding. It does not rely on approval, for it burns from the soul's alignment with its deepest truth. Perhaps you have felt this same flame beginning to stir within you, that restless awareness that what once felt tolerable now feels impossible to bear. This is not you hardening, it is you awakening. It is the soul rising, refusing to live in false harmony for one moment longer. It is the inner voice that whispers, "Enough." And in that moment of awakening, something irreversible occurs. You begin to see that the most dangerous and liberating act you can commit for yourself, for the world, for all who have benefited from your silence, is to become holy and unapologetically yourself. This selfhood is not arrogance, It is not coldness. It is love, but love in its fiercest and purest form. A love that says, I will not abandon myself for you. I will not betray my soul to keep you comfortable. This, right here, is where the empath's true power lies, not in their endless capacity to feel everyone's pain, but in their sacred ability to feel their own soul so vividly, so clearly, that nothing and no one can pull them away from it. They become like a force of nature, calm as still water, steady as stone, and unyielding in the face of chaos. They no longer need to fight or argue for their worth, because their very existence, their presence, is the proof of what it means to live authentically. In a world crowded with masks and pretenses, such authenticity becomes the most subversive, and yes, the most dangerous thing of all. But this danger is not one to fear, it is one to revere. For the world, weary and fragmented, is in desperate need of empaths who are truly awake, who are no longer drained by the unconscious demands of others, who no longer confuse love with self-erasure. What the world needs now are empaths who can stand firmly in their own power, who can speak truth without apology, who can love without losing themselves in the process. These are the quiet revolutionaries, the ones who will change the world, not by force, not by protest or control, but simply by their presence. Their very being challenges the outdated structures of relationship, those built on guilt, manipulation, and fear, and replaces them with something new, something real, something alive. And if you are an empath, perhaps this right now is your calling. Perhaps life itself is whispering to you, asking you to stop carrying what was never yours to bear. Perhaps you are being invited to step into the fire of your own transformation, to let that sacred flame burn away the illusions that have kept you small. This journey will not be easy. Awakening never is. It will ask you to face your own shadow, to acknowledge the anger, grief, and exhaustion you've buried beneath years of being the strong one. It will demand that you release the roles and identities that once defined you. But beyond that, surrender lies freedom, a kind of freedom the world cannot grant or take away, because it is born deep within your own being. You will know you've reached it when your empathy no longer feels like a burden to carry, but a flame to nurture, a flame that warms instead of burns, that illuminates instead of consumes. You will know it when you can say no without guilt, when you can love without losing yourself, when you can stand alone and still feel whole. In that moment, you will understand why the Fed-Up Empath is the most dangerous archetype of all. It is not because they seek to destroy, it is because they cannot be destroyed. They have walked through the fire of their own undoing and emerged on the other side unshaken, unbroken, and more vividly alive than ever before. This, I believe, is the true destiny of the empath, not to remain a silent vessel for the world's suffering, but to become a living embodiment of integration, of shadow and light reconciled, to love fiercely without self-betrayal, to live as a beacon of authenticity in a world still addicted to illusion. It is not a path for the faint of heart, but it is a path of immense beauty and purpose. For in choosing this path, you do not just free yourself, you become a light for others, a spark that ignites change in those still asleep. And that is the kind of danger the world so desperately needs. Not the danger of destruction, but the danger of truth, freedom, and fearless love. So I say to you, if you feel this stirring within, if you sense the fire awakening in your chest, Do not run from it. Do not silence it. Trust the process. Trust the flame that burns within you. It is not here to destroy you. It is here to set you free. And when you are free truly, wildly, wholly free, when you are fully alive in your own truth, then there is nothing more powerful, nothing more necessary, and nothing more unstoppable.